Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. I'm Josh Williams and I'm joined after a week on the substitute bench by David Hughes. How are you getting on, mate?
Yeah, good. Thanks, mate. Good to be back. I'm sure I wasn't missed with Guy Clark stepping in and taking over.
Well, he's ever reliable, isn't he? He's always putting in a solid performance. He did that again last
Yeah,
week. But it's good to have you back. And
thank you.
I mean, we've got plenty to talk about, haven't we? This week was initially going to be a bit of a transfer committee podcast with a specific focus on Sadio Mane replacements. But Liverpool have kind of beat us to it. We've missed the boat a little bit on that one. So since we agreed that we were going to record that, Liverpool seem to have agreed. Well, I mean, they seem on the verge of agreeing a deal for Darwin Nunez, mate. So most of this episode is going to be dedicated to him. Bit of a surprise move, plenty to talk about with that one. And depending on where we are at, once we finish that, we will talk about further squad issues. But Darwin Nunez, mate, surprised?
A little bit, yeah, I am. Obviously, he's been on the radar for a little while. Full disclosure from the outset, he's not a player I was particularly aware of, beyond 12 months ago. But then, with all due respect, if you kind of look at his career before this campaign, there was nothing really you'd say particularly outstanding. Just looked like a fairly decent young player. But obviously this season he's kind of blown up. Scored a ton of goals, big goals in big competitions as well. Obviously he's done really well in Portugal, but scoring goals in the Champions League. Coincidentally, obviously scored home and away against Liverpool. Put him on the radar. A lot of Premier League clubs. Manchester United looked like the ones who were the most interested, which is understandable. They need a forward, but here we are. Liverpool have shown a hand a little bit, and surprisingly look like they're about to make a move. And I guess it shows where Liverpool are at the moment. That if both Manchester United and Liverpool come to the table, most top players are going to be choosing Anfield over Old Trafford, especially with the Champions League football as that kind of added incentive. So, yeah, to answer your initial question, Josh, very surprised at that one.
Yeah, I am as well. We did an episode of a couple of months back, maybe 6 months ago or something like that. And we do them every now and then, don't we? Where we just go through scouting picks. Not necessarily for Liverpool, just players we like the look of, players to keep an eye on. And my player at the time was Nunez. But I remember saying that I don't know if he's Liverpool level. And my analysis of him at the time as well was pretty pretty basic in a way, because I've since looked at him and realised that I was wrong in some of the things that I said. We'll get to that, but I think it's interesting that in January West Ham bid for him. West Ham tried to get him for about 50 million. I think David Moyes needed a striker. I mean, David Moyes knows his recruitment, to be fair to him.
One? So was that 5-0 or 1? Was that 5-0? You said
50. Yeah, 50. Yeah,
cool.
And Benfica rejected it, and his trajectory seemed to continue for the rest of the season, to the extent that now Liverpool are trying to get him, and Manchester United, as you say, pretty interesting there that they don't even seem to be interested in engaging in much of a battle with Liverpool. Really, it doesn't. Like a few years back, they both engaged in a battle for, I think it was Memphis Depay, and this time around, Man United don't even seem to be starting, and just because they probably appreciate that Liverpool are on a different level at the minute. But in terms of Nunez, then, just as overall game, one of the reasons this is such an interesting transfer, in fact, it could be, would you say, maybe the most interesting move Liverpool have made since we've covered them?
Probably, yeah, because what they've done really well, obviously, over the past few years is they've kind of recruited for players who really fit well with the shape that they play, like a 4-3-3 fit the style, similar-ish profiles. But, Nunez you could argue, is quite different, isn't he?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. He's kind of the first striker, the first proper striker that Klopp it seems to be signing. he's demonstrated a bit of an obsession with forwards since he's been at Liverpool. Forwards for me are slightly different to strikers. Strikers predominantly play through the middle, occupy the penalty box, finish moves, don't really construct moves too much, don't really play on the flanks too much. I think Nunez has got a little bit of the left flank about him, but he is predominantly a number 9 for me. And it's interesting that Liverpool are going to move towards that, considering they've been wedded to forwards for a few years now. The first thing I want to touch on, mate, is finishing. And the reason I find it's interesting is because of the numbers behind it. Now, he's obviously regarded as a proper elite finisher. Had a great season. This year, he has scored 26 league goals with 4 assists. So he's obviously more of a scorer than a creator. 22 of those goals were non-penalty. And he also scored a further 6 in the Champions League, 2 of which came against Liverpool. So he's obviously got finishing on his side. But if you look at the numbers behind his finishing, I'm not sure you've seen them. His conversion rate this season in the Portuguese Premier League was 27.2%. Now, anyone who regularly looks at the numbers will know that that's a significant jump above average. The top performers in Europe typically around 15-20%, is it, Dave?
Yeah, somewhere between there, yeah.
Yeah, well, for Nunez to post 27%, it's good and it's bad, because it showcases that he's being clinical and ruthless. But then, the analytics take on it, I suppose, would be, well, it's not going to continue.
Yeah, and it's a really good point you make. It's something I thought, when I've watched them, and because inevitably in the roles that we have and the clubs that we cover, I've written about him a lot, and I'm pretty sure you would have been writing about him a lot as well. One thing that's really stood out to me is I was looking at a lot of the goals and a lot of the shots he was taking. I was thinking, he's a player who's really confident at the moment. He's in a really confident mood. Shooting from many different positions and kind of scoring these worldies. But that's kind of almost inflated this game where you're seeing him pinging 40-yard balls, passes and things. Just really, really impressive stuff. But stuff that you tend to do when everything's going your way, when your confidence is really high. And I think this leads to the point that you're making with the conversion rate. I'd be interested to see over a more prolonged period if that sort of finishing efficiency would be maintained, or as he just had a really hot season. Because the issue we have is pre the last 12 months, there's not a ton to go off. Certainly at a top tier, there's not a ton to work with to try and kind of use it as an extra measurement. So, yeah, you are right. It's both a positive, because on one hand you can make the case you've got a really efficient finisher here, but on the other hand, it's, as he just had a really good season, is he as good as he's looking now? And if he isn't, then the potential fee to bring him in could be a massive investment that might not be worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, in that sense, it's a similar deal, I think, to Luis Diaz. Because when we signed Diaz, one of the reasons we were initially surprised was because he didn't really have much background behind him. He hadn't been on the European scene for very long. He'd been playing in Colombia about 2 years previous to his move to Liverpool, I think. So we haven't been on the scene for very long, and Liverpool's tendency when it comes to signing these players, particularly the expensive ones, they've usually got years of proof behind them. Diaz didn't really have that. Obviously, it hasn't proved to be a problem. But when it comes to Nunez hasn't really got that either. He has just obviously experienced a season at Benfica. Last season, he also spent at Benfica. But the year before, Spanish second division, playing for Almeria. And the year before that, he just spent his third year with Penarol in the Uruguayan first division, top flight. So there's not that much to go on, which is why these finishing numbers in particular are interesting, because he does seem to be clinical, seems to be ruthless. He takes his chances and all that, but it's just a relatively short sample size compared to what we're used to dealing with when it comes to Liverpool forwards. For a bit of perspective, I think this season, I think Sadio Mane's conversion rate was about 16%. I think Jota's was about the same. Cristiano Ronaldo's, I think, were about the same. Son Heung-min, for perspective, is 28% this season. So, but he is that player for me, Dave. He's that kind of player who does take his chances, Son. And he's proven that over an extended period of time. He consistently overperforms his XG. Nunez is a little bit less of that. This season, again, for a bit of perspective, according to Opta numbers, he posted an XG in the Portuguese top flight of about 15, and he scored, I think it was 22 non-penalty goals. So he's overperformed XG by about 7 goals there.
Yeah, and I seem to remember that he's had more than one kind of goal from distance as well. As we were talking, actually, I was trying to bring up his goals, see how many came from outside the box, but yeah, I mean, my internet connection's pretty poor, so it's taking forever. I don't want to keep people waiting, so maybe I'll look at that in a minute. But I remember him scoring a few of those goals, which on one hand you can say, okay, he's capable of scoring them, but on the other hand, there's a reason why people don't score those goals consistently, because they're hard to kind of replicate. So that'll play into why he's overperformed. But I mean, it sounds like we're being really negative. It isn't. You can make a strong case that he on paper looks to be an efficient finisher. That kind of matches what we've seen with the eye test, I guess you could label it. Watch them, he's looked really dangerous in front of goal. But there is also this other part that's worth highlighting. That okay, you in an ideal world, you probably, for example, you're using the comparison of Son, aren't you, Josh? And you've said there, you see him as that guy, a top finisher. I agree, but we also have X amount of Premier League campaigns to lean back on to form that narrative. Whereas it's a little bit more, the water's a little bit more muddy with Nunez, shall we say? But I think and maybe we'll come on to this in a little bit, but I think a big thing with him is it's not just his goals. I think Liverpool buying him forward it's probably the other stuff as well. His kind of physical traits and what he can offer in that sense, that is maybe just as important in terms of the long term stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I raised the finishing thing first is just simply because it's probably the immediate analytics take when you look at his numbers that he has converted his chances to a ridiculous level. I sent out a newsletter yesterday on him, and I said if he's going to convert 27.2% of his shots for the rest of his career, I mean, he's comfortably worth the fee, isn't he?
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to ask you beyond the analytics then is what's your take on him in terms of the eye test, in terms of how he looks? Because I think he comes across to me as a little bit awkward almost, but sometimes your eyes can do that to you.
Yeah, I think what I think that comes down to. Initially, his size, 6'2", big player, big profile. Sometimes you will see if a few of his touches look a little bit loose, but I think he's actually got quite decent feet considering his size. I've seen him, especially if you see some of those clips of him out on the left. I think he cuts in really well into that kind of shooting position. So yeah, I think he's probably technically a little bit better than we maybe have given credit for in the past. But on the subject of you saying maybe your eyes tricking you a little bit, I do just think that's because of his size. However, it's good to have that, especially in this league, because it's really key in kind of holding off big defenders, and he can kind of be I know we've talked about this before, but and it's a little bit cliche, but he's got the profile that can be that that target man that nobody like currently in this Liverpool squad can kind of replicate what he can potentially bring.
Yeah, one of the players who I think I associate him with when I'm watching him, particularly when he's going direct with an opponent, when he's running with the ball, carrying the ball. He reminds me a little bit of the Liverpool version of Fernando Torres. Fernando Torres was similar in terms of he was quick, but he was also over 6 foot, really good in the air. Maybe a little bit less inclined to come wide, but when Torres was running with the ball specifically at his opponents, I always felt that he never really looked like he knew what he was doing or where he was going. It was kind of on the fly stuff, and his dribbling and his close control never appeared that amazing. Yet he still just regularly beat his man, regularly caused issues through it, and just seemed to be good at it. I remember a few years ago, Liverpool had a centre half, Mamadou Sakho, and on the ball, people were just generally concerned with him on the ball because he just looked awkward. But he never really was. He was always just relatively decent, and he just always usually kept the ball, really. So, as I said, sometimes your eyes can play games with you when it comes to that sort of stuff. I do think he's a little bit like maybe a Jota in terms of he's not properly refined when it comes to his touch and his close control and things like that. Maybe like a Guardiola player, but he is still technically highest level. So I don't think it's going to be an issue with anything like that. But I think he's going to be another Klopp Liverpool type forward in that maybe he's inclined to lose the ball a lot. Maybe his first touch is going to be off a fair bit, and he can be a little bit frustrating maybe at times. I think that's been a word of his early career for Benfica. That the fans were frustrated with him initially, and then he just kind of exploded. But you mentioned the the height of him, the size of him, say 6'2". So I think it's going to be interesting considering how his presence might impact Trent.
Yeah, well, and Robertson on the other side. You've got kind of two elite wing backs, certainly from an offensive point of view, both capable of so many dangerous crosses per game. Really, a lot. Right up there can put a variety of great balls in, and you kind of look back and you think, okay, Liverpool have had a lot of success in terms of cutbacks. And what I would say, in all fairness, although Liverpool's attack hasn't been a big attack for much of Klopp's time, if you think of Mane, Firmino, Salah, etc., Jota, who's come in, not a huge side, but very good in the air. To be fair, Mane's scored a good few headed goals. I think Jota's got a few as well. So they are dangerous from that kind of attacking point of view. But I don't think you can substitute what a big aerial presence brings to the team. Liverpool haven't had that. Suddenly they have. And if you think of not only kind of Trent and Robertson putting those balls in the box, but if you think of set pieces, how dangerous is Liverpool from set pieces. Van Dijk often profits. Suddenly you've got a forward on the pitch who's good in the air, has a big presence from these moments, and I think honestly can take them up a level in terms of the threat they pose.
Yeah, well, this season he scored, I think it was seven goals in all competitions with his head. But at Liverpool, if he was to play for Liverpool, I'd expect those numbers to maybe benefit from a little bit of a jump, simply because of the deliveries he's being presented with. I think Trent in particular is inclined to hit those whipped crosses from the half space areas, whereas Robertson is maybe a bit more of a byline man. So I think Trent can certainly benefit from. One curious thing, by the way, Dave, about Liverpool's forwards, I had no idea Jota was 5'10". I thought he was shorter than that. Mane's 5'8", for example. Jota's one of Liverpool's. I think he's Liverpool's tallest forward.
I mean, two things. One, neither did I. That's really caught me out. I would have thought he'd go 5'8", 5'9".
Yeah.
And two, the fact that 5'10" is one of the tallest for your forward kind of hammers home our point, doesn't it? Really, that there isn't anyone like that at the moment in the team. Josh, what's Salah?
You know what? I'll get him up now while you're speaking, but I don't think he's much different. Yeah, 5'8".
Yeah, I would have put them all in the same category. I know we're only talking a few inches, but it makes the difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. So where else can we go on Diaz then? So I think one of the main talking points, obviously, is price. Now he is looking very expensive at the minute, according to reports. As I said, we are recording before the deal has been agreed, so it's not confirmed, nothing like that. But reports in Portugal, at least, suggest that it's 80 million plus 20 million in potential add-ons, which would be a Liverpool transfer record, and would be very unlike the club, in my opinion. It's quite surprising, really surprising.
Yeah. Two ways to look at it for me. On the positive aspect, you can say, if you look at the price tags for a lot of forwards now in Europe, including Lukaku's deal last season, you'd have to say maybe in and around 80 million now is the going rate for a consistent goal scorer. So from that point of view, I could understand it. But that being said, for me, and this is personal opinion, based on what we've just been talking about, it just feels like it's a lot of money for the player who might not necessarily have a transformational impact on the team. I mean, he could,
Yeah,
but you look at Lukaku and you think, that didn't really work out. You think of the outlay on Grealish. Okay, we're talking about different profiles, but I'm just thinking of really big transfers or recent transfers. I think of Grealish didn't really have a transformational impact either. I suppose it's really tough, isn't it? Because I think Nunez does have the potential to be a long term investment as well. He's just 23, isn't he? So
he's not actually 23 yet. He's going to turn 23 in 15 days.
Okay, so technically, let's paint an accurate picture. He's still 22. So you think it is a long term investment, and maybe that's been factored into the price, but it's a lot of money, Josh, for me.
Yeah, I think that the big surprise for me is it's a lot of money for a player he's technically only done it for a year. He's only really done it for a season. I think that's one of the major surprises for me. Like if you look at someone like Alisson, someone like Van Dijk, been around for ages, it's a little bit different. Both being signed, by the way, as well at peak age. Nunez is still, as you said, 22, which is good, and it's probably a positive really because we've got him for more years than we were going to have Van Dijk and Alisson, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting that Liverpool are willing to sanction such a large amount for a 22-year-old striker who has done it for one season, and he's done it for one season in the sixth best league in Europe. So it is going to be interesting to see how things work out there. I take your point though when it comes to the going rate for strikers. I think Juventus have just paid. Was it around 70 million for Vlahovic?
Yeah, in January.
Yeah, I think Napoli paid a fair amount for Victor Osimhen, is it? Nigerian forward, Nigerian striker. So
on that, Josh, by the way, that they want something like 110 million euros to sell them this summer.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen him linked with Liverpool actually, and I thought to myself, no, absolutely no chance. I mean, if Liverpool are going to sign a forward like this, a striker, sorry, I keep calling him a forward, a striker like this, he has to be really mobile and quick as well. I'm not saying Osimhen isn't, but I think Nunez is that and a bit more. So it's a nice fit really. But I think this kind of sums up. We've been asked so many times on Q&As why Liverpool haven't signed a striker in Klopp's tenure, and one of my reasons has always been when a striker does well and he looks like a big prospect, everyone knows about it because he's probably just scored over 20, and as a result of that, his prices of strikers are always inflated. And this is perfect evidence. Klopp goes and buys his first striker at Liverpool. He is technically under the radar in a way. I mean, in terms of playing in the sixth best league in Europe and stuff, and only been around for a year, and he's costing around 100 million euros. But what I will say is, Benfica are masters at doing this. I think they got over 100 million for João Felix a few years back when it comes to selling them to Atletico Madrid. So they are the type of club that will just take you to the cleaners, really.
Yeah. And they're probably in a position where they think, Well, we don't need to sell. We don't really want to sell him at the moment. Has he got about 2 or 3 years left on his current deal?
Yeah, it's 3. That's the issue.
Right. So, I mean, they're in a really good position. If we were talking about this from a Benfica point of view, we'd be saying, well, they're in a really good position here. They can kind of call the shots a little bit more. Are Liverpool in a position where they feel for the change that they actually need to get this deal done, as opposed to thinking, well, we're comfortable enough holding on because, and I mentioned this to you slightly, in a message yesterday, are they looking at the business that Man City have done with Haaland and feeling like maybe not that I don't class Liverpool as a reactive like kind of transfer committee, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think they make decisions based on others, but I do just wonder whether they look at what City have done with Haaland and kind of think, one, maybe we need our own kind of marquee centre forward. I mean, there's a second point, but just before I move on to that, do you think that's played into it at all?
Not really, no. I would be surprised if... I know what you're saying, and I think from a lot of clubs, like if United were to do it, I would probably suspect it.
Yeah.
I just think with Liverpool, I would be really surprised if they've done this on the back of what anybody else has done. It just doesn't seem to be how the club work.
I mean, it's funny that you said if it was United, because United literally done that last year with Cristiano Ronaldo. They weren't even going to sign him, and then City did, and then they come in. But second point, do you think this transfer plus Carvajal coming in, do you think that the 4-2-3-1's finally coming?
Well, that was going to be my next point, so we'll sort that now. Actually, it is interesting. It's something that has been mentioned a few times, and I'll be honest. I've always thought every time we start hearing murmurs of 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3 always remains. It just remains intact all the time, and I can understand why that's the case because it's been drilled into these players week in, week out for years under Jurgen Klopp. They know it inside out. And when it comes to recruitment, it's a lot easier when buying players for specific roles in the system. Whereas if you change your system, if you're changing your system all the time, it's difficult to recruit players to execute those roles if they're always changing. Having said that, I think if it is ever going to change under Klopp, it's going to change now. That's if it's going to change. Because this is the period now where, one of the wide forwards who the system has been built around is about to leave, like Bayern Munich. More of a orthodox, not in a traditional sense, but more orthodox compared to Liverpool forwards, orthodox strikers coming in. And you are signing a number 10. So I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be as surprised as previous years. I still think 4-3-3 will remain as the go-to, if I'm honest. But I think maybe the split with 4-2-3-1, maybe it'll be a lot closer to 50-50 than it's been in previous years. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Because, I mean, I just happened to look at this yesterday, and 4-3-3 was 96% of Liverpool's fixtures last season. So, yeah, I agree. I don't think we're going to see I think what we might see is the formation change and dependence on the opposition. If Liverpool are coming up against a team, lower half, mid-table side, who are going to come to Anfield and sit in a deep block, then we might see the 4-2-3-1 with the extra attacker. So you got 4 attackers on the pitch instead of 3. Maybe if you're coming up against, a City, Chelsea, someone like that, the 4-3-3 may remain in those games. That's what I'm expecting. But I know we've focused mainly on Nunez, but the reason I think more so that we could see the change this summer is because of Carvajal coming in. Just because, make no mistake about it, he is a number 10. That's where he's played. He's played number 10 in a 4-2-3-1 for much of his time at Fulham, and that's where he excelled. And although you could make a case for him maybe going out wide or playing as an 8, I just thought surely the intention is to use him as a number 10 at some point, and obviously he's probably at this age not yet in a position where Liverpool just throw him in week out and he'll thrive. But maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, that the intention is that he's going to be the 10 that they build around. So I mean, these are all theories, aren't we? We don't know for sure, do we? But that's just where I'm leaning towards at the moment.
Well, I think the big thing is whether the squad is going that way. I do think Klopp would always just use whatever formation makes the most sense for the squad. I think the majority of coaches would do that. Liverpool's squad has just always been constructed in a way which suits 4-3-3, suits 3 midfielders, and suits 3 forwards. But now, as you say, with 1 or 2 number 10s being added, in terms of Carvalho, Firmino as history as number 10, maybe you could throw Harvey Elliott in there as a 10. And Liverpool's midfielders now, they're kind of getting on, really. I mean, Thiago, Henderson, Milner, they're all comfortably over 30, and Fabinho isn't the most mobile. So I've just been trying to get Tchouaméni, which is quite interesting, because he's been playing as a 2 at Monaco. And I think maybe, does 4-2-3-1 just make more sense if your wide forwards score less goals than the previous wide forwards that were at the club? And what I mean by that is, in Diaz, Liverpool have got a top player, obviously, but I think Diaz does a bit more of the other stuff than Mane, who is more goal-orientated. Salah, goal-orientated. I think Diaz has a bit more wing play about him. And given that, maybe you have to add another little forward into the mix just to get that guaranteed goal threat all the time.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you make, actually. On that, especially Diaz. He is more traditional wide man. He does score goals. Obviously, he scores goals, but he also creates a lot as well. And if you look at Mane's record, though, in the Premier League, predominantly it's always more goals than assists, despite being a wide forward. And okay, a lot of that ties in with the system, but I think it's a good point. Yeah, I think you're bringing in now more wide men who are wide men, and therefore a system where those wide attackers tend to do a little bit more of the traditional stuff would make sense.
So one question I did want to ask you is a basic one in terms of numbers, at least. So Nunez' passing, right? His passing numbers and I suppose his general game as well suggest that he is not maybe as inclined as Klopp's current options to get involved in construction and build-up play and chance creation for others and all that sort of stuff, which kind of ties back to the whole principle of what total football is, I suppose. I think Nunez averages about 19 passes per match, per 90, sorry. Most of Liverpool's forwards, I think, tend to post around 30. So it's not a major problem. People would say, you're not buying them to make passes, you're buying them to score goals, which I understand. But what I'm getting at is, maybe Liverpool now, with Nunez's addition, are signing a bit more of a possession-based passenger than they've previously had. And I think the same applies to City with Haaland. I think it's interesting that Liverpool and City are both this summer going to be moving towards a possession-based game which incorporates 9 outfielders rather than 10, if you know what I mean. And that fixed focal point in the box just kind of finishes the moves. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that'll be a seamless transition? Do you think I'm just overthinking it all?
No, I don't think you are. And what I would say is there's probably an element of those numbers being so low. There could be system things in there. His role for Benfica could have an influence on that. Maybe if he was at Liverpool and asked to do a little bit more of that, he would, and he'd do so successfully. But I'm not so sure. I'm inclined to probably agree with the latter point you were making, that Haaland's probably come in predominantly to score goals. I think there's a chance Nunez has come in to do the same as well. And then everything that comes after that is kind of benefit, I guess, a little bit more on top. But I think predominantly, he's coming in to score goals, and that'll be less of that Firmino. Okay, let's drop in as a kind of number 10 and link play, be that glue in the attacking third. No, it's not going to be that. It's going to be more of it's going to be a different kind of 4-3-3, I guess, the point I'm trying to make, instead of it kind of having the one dropping in, he's going to be the kind of spear point, the focal point of the attack. Which is quite the change, really, compared to what Liverpool have been playing over these last few years. Their 4-3-3 hasn't been that, but it looks like it's going to be now. In short, I just can't foresee Nunez coming in and playing like a Firmino role. I don't think that plays up to his skill set.
No, but I think that captures the point almost, that it is a pretty dramatic shift, really, when you're going from a forward. I keep going a forward. When you're going from a striker like Firmino, who is a lot more inclined than any of his peers, really, to come deep and get on the ball. I think if you look at Firmino's passing numbers compared to other, spearheaded players in systems, he probably touches the ball more often than any of them, just because he's a natural number 10 by nature, really.
Mm-hmm.
Nunez is kind of the opposite in many ways. So Liverpool are making quite a dramatic shift there when it comes to their number 9, if you like. So it's going to be interesting to see how things work out. But I think on the positive side, although he might be somewhat of a passenger with possession, I don't think he's going to be defensively, and that's why I think Liverpool are interested in this player, despite him being a striker and not fitting the typical mould. He does seem to be, typically South American, really, in terms of their willingness to work without the ball, and very, very aggressive. And he's from humble beginnings by all accounts. I've seen a few stories about that sort of stuff. So I think it's a must, really, isn't it? It's an absolute necessity that your striker under Jurgen Klopp for Liverpool has to be a grafter, essentially.
Well, yeah, because, again, you try to avoid cliches, but it's not always possible. The striker is the first defender, and the lead from the front. So you think about what the rest of that attack do in terms of pressure, it's huge, and he's got to do that. But and I think he will. You're right. Yeah, I'm thinking of players, Uruguayan attackers. For me, Cavani, what an unbelievable work rate, I should say, without the ball, a constant menace. And from what I've seen of Nunez, he seems to have those traits in him. Really aggressive.
Suarez was the same.
Suarez. I feel like there's another one I can't think off the top of my head, but yeah, it kind of comes part and parcel with it. Maybe it's you've got to bring that aspect into your game to really stand out in South America to kind of get your moves over to Europe and get your chance. And he does seem to have that, and that's never not going to be integral for no matter what changes happen or no matter how this Liverpool team evolve. That kind of pressing culture and that aggressiveness without the ball will never change. And it is kind of telling that no matter who Liverpool go for in terms of profiles, they always seem to have that edge to them, that ability without the ball to influence things. If you think of Diaz, if you think of Jota, Jota was labelled by Pep Linders, wasn't he, a pressing monster? That was not even taking into consideration stuff he done attacking wise, and I'd definitely put Nunez in that bracket. I think he's going to be a good introduction in that sense.
I actually think he might be more natural in that sense than Haaland, actually, when it comes to working without the ball, chasing the opponents, just putting in the dirty work, essentially. I think he's more naturally inclined to do that than Haaland. So that's going to be interesting to see whether that's the case, to see how Guardiola gets around that. Have you got a point there, or?
No, I'm just agreeing. I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, you mentioned Jota there. I suppose one of the final points I want to make regarding Nunez is a few people have raised the issue of what this potentially means for Jota, because he's a striker / forward type. Prefers the left if he's going to use any flank, and he cuts inside. Maybe not the sharpest on the ball, doesn't touch the ball that much. Bit of a poacher, good in the air. Does it sound like anyone? You know what I mean? That you could all of those apply to Nunez, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, I'm just having a look at Jota now as we're talking, and it kind of feels like those final few weeks of the season his role in the team really subsided. And I was just checking, it wasn't as a result of injuries, and it wasn't really. He really struggled to get a consistent run in the team for a full 90 minutes at very least. Sometimes often forced for cameos, and it's strange because he scored a lot of goals, a lot of important goals, but I think over the last few months it was a little bit of an eye opener in terms of his other abilities. I don't know if you felt like this, Josh, or people listening and watching, but I felt like there was a lot of performances that frankly weren't the best, a bit poor, but they were masked with crucial goals, and in some ways that was like a really appealing trait, being able to score even when you're not your best. But you do wonder if someone like Nunez with a similar profile come in and kind of scored the goals but provided everything else that at times Jota was lacking, what that would mean for Jota. I guess we won't know until further down the line, but his place in that starting 11 doesn't seem solidified at the moment in my eyes.
Yeah, I mean, I will say he is the most adaptable of Liverpool's forwards, I would say. He's incredibly two-footed, can play on both flanks. And if you were to ask me now, who will start the first game of Liverpool's Premier League season, next season this is, I think Jota probably will. I'm not sure if Nunez will immediately be thrown into proceedings. Maybe he will, I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if Klopp started with a front three of Diaz, Salah, and Jota. Just keep things same.
That's a rare one for us. That I actually disagree. I think he would.
Do you?
I think he would start him. Yeah, I do.
Well, I suppose getting him in early in the summer opens up that possibility, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. But I'm just thinking, considering the pressure that is placed on the shoulders of strikers to score goals and start with a bang and all that, I think Klopp might want to remove that from him, but I don't know. It totally depends on pre-season, how things go between now and then. But I don't think Jota will be totally out the fray, and you've got to remember that Mane is leaving, so that means a fair amount of minutes open up there for Jota. But just in terms of stylistic fit, at least in terms of what he offers as a player, profile wise and things, he does share many similarities with Nunez, and I'm just not sure maybe what that means really, because if you're paying 100 million for Nunez starts, and Nunez probably starts as a striker. Diaz, for me, has the left side. Jota's probably not a 10, and Salah's got the right side. Salah leaves next season probably, but then Jota's not left-footed. I suppose you could take the role still, but he's not left-footed. I would prefer left-footed there. So it's just interesting. Maybe Jota was just always bought as that super versatile player who just plays where Liverpool need him. Maybe he's just always going to be that.
Yeah, well, that's what he come in as, wasn't it? And he's maybe the idea is just keep him like that, because we know, sadly, not everybody stays fit.
Yeah, sadly, but hopefully Nunez does. But I think we'll round up there, mate. I think we've done enough there for a full episode on Nunez, I think. Obviously got to get through the summer. There's plenty of other talking points around Liverpool, Minamino, Ox, and all that. But we'll get to them next week, I think. And we might even have a look at potential alternatives to Adelan Chouameni, who seems to be going to Real Madrid. So, Dave, thanks for joining us, mate.
Thank you, mate.
And we'll be back next week. Hopefully by then, Liverpool have landed their first striker of Jurgen Klopp's tenure. But thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.